"Look what we got here, boys," Staff Sergeant Rodriguez announced with cruel amusement, his voice echoing across the Fort Benning training ground. "Army sending us a little girl to play with the big toys." He gestured mockingly at 22-year-old Emma Walsh's petite 5 feet 2 inches frame as 30 male recruits erupted in laughter. "Think Barbie here can handle 67 tons of American steel?" They called her Princess, hid her gear, sabotaged her equipment, and made every day a living hell. What they didn't know was that this little girl would soon become the youngest tank commander in Fort Benning's history, and the very person they'd have to salute. The Georgia sun beat down mercilessly on Fort Benning's Armor Training Center as Emma Walsh stepped off the transport bus, her duffel bag slung over her shoulder. At 22, she possessed the kind of natural beauty that seemed out of place in the harsh military environment: shoulder-length blonde hair pulled back in regulation style, bright blue eyes that sparkled with determination, and a smile that could light up a room. But it was precisely that beauty, combined with her small stature, that would make her next 16 weeks a nightmare. "All right, maggots." Staff Sergeant Miguel Rodriguez's voice boomed across the assembly area. At 6 feet 4 inches with arms like steel beams and a chest full of combat ribbons, Rodriguez was the embodiment of military intimidation. His dark eyes swept across the 31 recruits, 30 men and 1 woman, before settling on Emma with obvious displeasure. "Welcome to the United States Army Armor School, where we turn civilians into tank crews," Rodriguez continued, his scarred face twisted in perpetual scowl. "For the next 16 weeks, you will eat, sleep, and breathe M1 Abrams main battle tank operations. Some of you might actually become soldiers. Most of you will wash out and find yourselves pushing paper in some rear echelon unit." Emma stood at attention in the back row, trying to blend in with the predominantly male group. She'd known this moment would come. The sizing up, the inevitable comments about her gender and size. What she hadn't expected was how quickly the hostility would surface. Well, came a deep voice from beside her. Emma turned to see Jake Morrison, a stocky farm boy from Alabama with massive hands and a Confederate flag tattoo snaking up his forearm. His name tag read Morrison, and everything about him screamed small-town quarterback. "Looks like they're really scraping the bottom of the barrel now." "Maybe she's lost," added Marcus Thompson, a tall recruit from Texas with a thick drawl and permanent tobacco bulge in his cheek. He spat a stream of brown juice into the dirt, never taking his eyes off Emma. "This is tank school, sweetheart, not secretarial training." The laughter spread through the group like wildfire. At 5 feet 2 inches and maybe 110 pounds soaking wet, Emma looked like she'd have trouble lifting a tank manual, let alone operating 67 tons of armored warfare technology. Several recruits nudged each other and whispered comments just loud enough for her to hear. $20 says she cries before dinner," muttered Kevin Walsh, a wiry kid from Boston with attitude written all over his face. "I'll take that bet," replied David Kim, a Korean-American recruit from California. "But I say she quits before the week's out." Emma felt their stares burning into her but kept her face neutral, her breathing steady. She'd learned long ago that reactions were weapons in the wrong hands, and she had no intention of giving these men any ammunition to use against her. What none of them knew was that Emma had grown up in a military family. Her father was a retired tank commander who'd served 3 tours in Iraq, and her grandfather had driven Sherman tanks across Europe in World War II. They didn't know about the countless summer afternoons she'd spent in her father's garage, learning to strip down engines that were older than some of the recruits standing beside her. They couldn't see the discipline that had been drilled into her since she could walk, or the burning desire to prove that excellence had nothing to do with gender or size. But most importantly, they had no idea why she was really here. "That's enough." Rodriguez's voice cut through the chatter like a blade, but Emma caught the slight smirk on his face before he turned away. The message was crystal clear: she was on her own. As the group moved toward the barracks for initial processing, Emma found herself walking alone, separated from the clusters of male recruits who were already forming bonds based on shared backgrounds and mutual respect for each other's obvious physical capabilities. The isolation was immediate and palpable. "Hope you brought your own pillow, Princess," Jake Morrison called out loud enough for everyone to hear. "The Army ones might be too rough for that delicate skin." "Maybe we should ask for separate quarters," added Marcus Thompson, working his tobacco. "I didn't sign up to babysit." The verbal assault continued as they processed through equipment issue. When Emma struggled to carry the massive duffel bag full of gear that had been designed for much larger soldiers, nobody offered to help. Instead, she heard whispered comments about physical standards and lowering the bar. "Look at her trying to drag that bag," Kevin Walsh snickered to his new buddies. This is what happens when politicians get involved in military training. She'll be gone by Friday, David Kim predicted confidently. My money's on a mysterious family emergency or sudden change of heart. The barracks assignment was Emma's first real test. She was placed in a 4-person room with 3 male recruits, Jake Morrison, Marcus Thompson, and a quiet kid from Ohio named Brian Phillips who seemed uncomfortable with the arrangement but wasn't brave enough to speak up. Well, this is just great, Jake announced as they entered the spartanly furnished room with its metal bunk beds and wall lockers. How are we supposed to change clothes and relax with Princess here watching? Maybe she can use the supply closet, Marcus suggested with false helpfulness. Probably more her size anyway. Emma said nothing, simply claimed the bunk in the corner and began organizing her gear with methodical precision. Every piece of equipment had its place, every tool was cleaned and inspected. It was a ritual her father had taught her, one that had become as natural as breathing. Jesus Christ, Jake muttered, watching her arrange her gear. Look at her going all OCD on us. What is this, summer camp? But Emma had already tuned them out, her hands moving with practiced efficiency. She'd learned that preparation was the difference between success and failure, between life and death. These tools weren't just equipment, they were extensions of herself, and she treated them with the respect they deserved. The first night was the worst. As the lights went out and the barracks settled into the restless quiet of 31 people trying to sleep while dealing with their own fears and anxieties, the whispered conversations continued. I heard they had to lower the physical standards just to get her in, someone said in the darkness. Affirmative action bullshit, came another voice. Meanwhile, there's probably some qualified guy sitting at home because her spot was reserved. My dad was in the army, a third voice added. Says women don't belong in combat roles. Too emotional, too weak. Liability to the whole unit. Emma lay in her narrow bunk, staring at the ceiling, listening to every word. She'd heard it all before, but it never got easier. Tomorrow would bring her first real test, and she knew the eyes of every recruit, every instructor, and every doubter would be on her. What they didn't know was that she'd been preparing for this moment her entire life. The mockery, the doubt, the barely concealed contempt, it was all just noise. She had something to prove, not just to them but to herself. And somewhere in the darkness she made a silent promise. Whatever they threw at her, however they tried to break her down, she would not quit. Too much depended on her success. The alarm shrieked at 0500 hours, jolting the barracks awake with military precision. Emma was already dressed and making her bunk when the other recruits were still fumbling for their boots. She'd been awake for 30 minutes, using the quiet time to review tank technical manuals by flashlight. Show off, Jake Morrison muttered, struggling to get his uniform straight. Probably trying to memorize the whole manual, Marcus Thompson added, working his morning tobacco. Book smart doesn't mean tank smart, princess. The harassment began immediately and systematically. During the march to morning formation, someone accidentally stepped on the back of Emma's boot, nearly causing her to fall. When she tried to fall in with her assigned squad, the recruits spread out just enough to make it clear she wasn't welcome in their ranks. Oops, sorry princess, Kevin Walsh said with fake innocence when he bumped into her during equipment inspection. Didn't see you there. You're so compact. The laughter that followed was cruel and intentional. During the first day of actual training, the harassment escalated. When Emma raised her hand to answer a technical question about tank armor specifications, Jake Morrison made exaggerated kissing sounds that drew snickers from half the class. Brown noser, he whispered just loud enough for her to hear. Trying to impress teacher? When Sergeant Rodriguez asked about engine maintenance procedures, Emma provided a detailed, accurate answer that clearly demonstrated extensive knowledge. Instead of earning respect, her expertise only seemed to irritate her fellow recruits. Probably had Daddy teach her, Marcus Thompson muttered to his growing circle of allies. Rich girl playing soldier. I heard her father's some big shot officer, David Kim added, the rumors spreading like poison. Must be nice to have connections. The whispers followed Emma everywhere. In the mess hall, she sat alone while conversations about her grew louder and more pointed at nearby tables. $20 says she's never even changed a tire, someone said. 50 says she cries during the first live fire exercise, another voice chimed in. I'll take that bet, Jake Morrison announced. But I say she washes out during the first physical fitness test. Look at those chicken arms. Emma had trained herself not to react to words, but the isolation was becoming increasingly difficult to bear. Every meal alone, every training exercise conducted in hostile silence, every night listening to whispered insults and crude jokes. The sabotage started small. Emma's gear would mysteriously disappear from her locker, only to be found later in the latrine or stuffed in a trash can. Her boots would be untied while she slept, causing her to stumble during morning formation. Someone put shaving cream in her helmet, ruining her hair and drawing laughter from the entire formation. "Oops," Kevin Walsh said with mock concern. "Looks like someone had a little accident, Princess. Maybe you should be more careful with your equipment." Sergeant Rodriguez saw everything but did nothing. If anything, he seemed to enjoy watching Emma struggle against the systematic harassment. "Military training builds character," he announced during one particularly brutal session where Emma's water bottle had been filled with salt water. "Separates the wheat from the chaff. Some people are just naturally suited for military service, others?" He looked directly at Emma. "Others find out they're not cut out for the real world." But Emma's real test came during the first week of hands-on tank training. The recruits were divided into crews of 4 for initial orientation on M1 Abrams operations. Emma found herself assigned to a crew with Jake Morrison as driver, Marcus Thompson as gunner, and Kevin Walsh as loader, a combination that felt less like coincidence and more like deliberate torture. "Great," Jake announced as they approached their assigned tank. "Just what I always wanted, a crew member who probably can't even reach the controls." "Maybe we should get her a booster seat," Marcus suggested, his tobacco creating its usual bulge. "Safety first, right, Princess?" The M1 Abrams main battle tank is an intimidating machine under the best circumstances. 67 tons of steel, ceramic armor, and depleted uranium protection, powered by a 1,500 horsepower gas turbine engine. For someone Emma's size, climbing into the commander's cupola required genuine effort. "Need a ladder?" Kevin Walsh asked with false helpfulness as Emma struggled to hoist herself up. "Maybe we should call maintenance for some modifications." But once inside the tank, something changed. Emma's hands found the controls with instinctive precision, her eyes reading the displays and gauges like a familiar language. This was what she'd been born for, what she'd trained for her entire life. "Driver, start engine," she commanded, her voice suddenly carrying new authority. Jake hesitated, surprised by the confidence in her tone. "You sure you know what you're doing, Princess?" "Start the engine," Emma repeated, her voice steady and firm. The massive gas turbine roared to life, sending vibrations through the steel hull. Emma monitored the startup sequence with professional attention, watching temperatures and pressures with the eye of someone who understood every component. "Engine temp looks good," she reported through the intercom. "All systems nominal. Driver, move to position Alpha." For the next hour, Emma commanded the tank crew through a series of basic maneuvers with growing confidence. Despite their initial resistance, Jake, Marcus, and Kevin found themselves responding to her clear, decisive orders. She knew the procedures, understood the equipment, and demonstrated tactical awareness that impressed even her harshest critics. But the success only made the harassment worse. "Big deal," Jake Morrison announced at dinner that night, loud enough for the entire mess hall to hear. "Anyone can memorize a manual. Let's see how Princess handles real pressure." "My cousin went through armor training at Fort Knox," Marcus Thompson added, working his tobacco. "Says there's always one recruit who thinks book learning makes them hot stuff. Usually doesn't last long when things get real." Emma continued eating her meal and reviewing her notes, but inside she felt the familiar ache of isolation growing stronger. She was succeeding at every technical challenge they threw at her, but that success was only making her more of a target. What she didn't know was that her performance was being watched by more than just her fellow recruits. Sergeant Rodriguez might have been hostile on the surface, but he was also documenting her abilities in daily reports that were finding their way up the chain of command. And in those reports, a very different picture was emerging, one of exceptional technical competence, natural leadership ability, and remarkable grace under pressure. The war was just beginning, but Emma Walsh was fighting it on more fronts than she realized. By week 4, the harassment had evolved into a sophisticated campaign of psychological warfare. Emma's belongings didn't just disappear, they were destroyed. Her study materials were accidentally soaked with water. Her uniforms were torn and had to be replaced at her own expense. Someone put itching powder in her sleeping bag, leaving her covered in welts. "Looks like Princess has some kind of rash," Jake Morrison announced during morning inspection, his voice dripping with false concern. "Maybe she's allergic to real army training." The laughter that followed was cruel and heartless. But the breaking point came during a live-fire exercise in week 5. Emma had been assigned as tank commander for her crew, responsible for coordinating movement, target acquisition, and fire control during a complex tactical scenario. It was her chance to prove that she belonged, that all the harassment and doubt were unfounded. The exercise began perfectly. Emma's commands were clear and precise, her tactical decisions sound, her crew coordination flawless. The tank moved through the engagement area like a predator, acquiring and destroying targets with surgical precision. Outstanding performance, came the voice of the range controller through their headsets. Crew Alpha is demonstrating textbook fire and movement. Emma felt a surge of pride and vindication. Finally, she was being allowed to show what she could do without sabotage or interference. For 20 minutes, she commanded her crew with growing confidence, earning grudging respect even from Jake, Marcus, and Kevin. But then disaster struck. During the final engagement sequence, as Emma called for their last shot, the main gun fired, but not at the intended target. Instead of hitting the enemy tank's silhouette 800 meters downrange, the round impacted dangerously close to the observation tower where officers and senior NCOs were monitoring the exercise. "Cease fire. Cease fire," came the panicked voice over the radio. "Crew Alpha, emergency shutdown. Now." Emma's heart pounded as she realized what had happened. Somehow, their ballistic computer had been programmed with incorrect range data, causing the round to fall dramatically short of its intended target. If the observation tower had been occupied by personnel instead of just monitoring equipment, people could have been killed. What the hell happened? Sergeant Rodriguez's voice exploded through their headsets as emergency vehicles raced toward their position. Emma's mind raced through the possibilities. She'd personally checked the fire control systems during pre-combat inspection. The range data had been correct, the target coordinates verified. There was no reason for such a catastrophic miss unless deliberate sabotage, she whispered to herself, the pieces clicking together. "Did you say something, Princess?" Jake Morrison's voice carried a note of satisfaction that made Emma's blood run cold. During the investigation that followed, Emma tried to explain what she suspected, that someone had deliberately altered their fire control computer to cause exactly this kind of accident. But without proof, her accusations sounded like the desperate excuses of someone trying to avoid responsibility for a serious safety violation. "Equipment malfunction, my ass," Rodriguez snarled during the debriefing. "This is what happens when you put unqualified personnel in positions of responsibility. Walsh, you're lucky nobody was killed. Sergeant, I think someone tampered with. I think you need to shut your mouth and accept responsibility for your failures," Rodriguez cut her off. "Real soldiers don't make excuses. They own their mistakes." The incident report went into Emma's permanent file as a serious safety violation due to operator error. Her chances of graduating from the program, already slim due to the ongoing harassment, had just taken a devastating blow. That night, as Emma lay in her bunk reviewing the sequence of events for the 100th time, she overheard a conversation that confirmed her worst suspicions. "That was beautiful," Kevin Walsh was whispering to his buddies in the darkness. "Did you see the look on her face when that round went long?" "Changing the ballistic computer settings was genius," Jake Morrison replied quietly. "Simple, effective, and completely untraceable. Best part is she'll get blamed for it," Marcus Thompson added with satisfaction. "No way they'll believe someone sabotaged the equipment. They'll just think Princess choked under pressure." Emma felt her world crashing down around her. They hadn't just been harassing her, they'd been actively sabotaging her training, putting lives at risk to make her look incompetent. And now they'd succeeded in creating a paper trail that would follow her for the rest of her military career. But as she lay there listening to their whispered celebration, something inside Emma hardened into steel. She'd been fighting a defensive battle, trying to survive their attacks while proving herself through performance. But they just escalated the conflict to a level where people could get hurt. It was time to go on the offensive. Emma's opportunity for revenge came sooner than expected. During Week 6, Sergeant Rodriguez announced a special training exercise, urban warfare simulation in the tank training facilities Mock City. The exercise would be conducted at night, using live ammunition and thermal sights, with recruits rotating through all crew positions to demonstrate their versatility. "This is your chance to prove you deserve to be here," Rodriguez announced, his eyes focusing on Emma with particular intensity. "Anyone who fails this exercise will be immediately recycled to the beginning of training or discharged from the program entirely." Emma volunteered for the most challenging role, tank commander during the final assault phase, when crews would have to coordinate complex movements through narrow streets while engaging multiple targets. It was exactly the kind of high-pressure scenario where her tormentors expected her to crack. But Emma had been planning. During the days leading up to the exercise, she'd noticed something her fellow recruits had missed. The harassment campaign against her had created a pattern. Jake Morrison, Marcus Thompson, and Kevin Walsh had become so focused on sabotaging her performance that they'd neglected their own training. While Emma studied technical manuals and practiced procedures until they were second nature, her tormentors spent their time planning pranks and psychological attacks. The night of the exercise, Emma was assigned to command a tank crew consisting of 3 recruits who hadn't been part of the harassment campaign: Brian Phillips, David Martinez, and Tom Wilson. They were nervous about working with her, having heard all the rumors about her incompetence. But they were also professional enough to follow orders. "Listen up," Emma said during their pre-mission briefing, her voice carrying new authority born of weeks of enduring harassment. "I know what you've heard about me. I know you think I'm a liability. But for the next 2 hours, your lives depend on following my orders exactly. Are we clear?" The 3 recruits nodded, surprised by the steel in her voice. "Good. Now let me tell you what's really been happening here." Emma's plan was elegant in its simplicity. Instead of trying to prove herself through individual excellence, she would demonstrate leadership by making her entire crew perform at a level that would shame her tormentors. More importantly, she would use her technical knowledge to expose the weaknesses in their training. The urban warfare exercise began at 2,200 hours with Emma's tank taking the lead position in a 3-vehicle assault formation. Through her thermal sights, she could see the mock city sprawling ahead, a maze of concrete buildings and narrow streets designed to test every aspect of tank crew coordination. "Driver, advance to phase line Alpha, speed 15 miles per hour, Emma commanded, her voice calm and professional. "Roger, 15 miles per hour to phase line Alpha," Brian Phillips responded from the driver's position. Behind them, Emma could see the other 2 tanks following. One commanded by Jake Morrison, the other by Marcus Thompson. She could hear their radio transmissions, and what she heard confirmed everything she'd suspected. They were nervous, uncertain, making basic tactical errors that demonstrated their lack of preparation. "Contact left 200 meters, Emma called out, identifying the first target through her commander's sight. "Enemy infantry position behind the wall." "Identified," David Martinez responded from the gunner's position. "Load he," Emma ordered, calling for a high-explosive round designed for anti-personnel targets. "He loaded," Tom Wilson confirmed from the loader's position. "Fire when ready." The main gun's discharge lit up the night as the high-explosive round destroyed the target with surgical precision. But Emma was already scanning for the next threat, her tactical awareness allowing her to stay ahead of the scenario. "Good hit. Driver, move to position Bravo. Gunner, traverse right, next target at 2 o'clock." For the next hour, Emma's crew moved through the urban maze with clockwork precision. Her commands were clear and decisive, her tactical decisions flawless, her crew coordination better than anything the instructors had seen from recruit crews. More importantly, she was demonstrating leadership qualities that made her crew perform beyond their individual capabilities. Meanwhile, the other tank crews were struggling. Jake Morrison's tank got lost in the narrow streets, missing 2 engagement opportunities while trying to reorient themselves. Marcus Thompson's crew engaged the wrong target, violating rules of engagement by firing on a simulated civilian position. "What's wrong, Morrison?" Emma called over the radio with false concern. "Having trouble reading your map?" "Shut up, princess," Jake's voice came back tight with frustration and embarrassment. "Watch your radio discipline," Emma replied coolly. "This is a professional exercise, not a playground." The psychological tables had completely turned. Emma was performing with confidence and competence while her tormentors made mistake after mistake under pressure. Every error they made was being recorded by the evaluators, every moment of confusion broadcast over the radio for everyone to hear. The climax came during the final objective, a coordinated assault on the Mock City's Central Command building. Emma's crew was assigned to provide supporting fire while the other 2 tanks advanced to secure the objective. "All stations, this is Walsh," Emma announced, using the standard radio protocol for the mission commander. "Beginning final assault phase. Morrison, advance to position Charlie. Thompson, provide overwatch from position Delta." But Jake Morrison's tank immediately made a critical error, turning down the wrong street and moving directly into a kill zone where enemy targets were concentrated. "Morrison, you're off course," Emma warned. "Reverse immediately and take alternate route." "I know what I'm doing." Jake snapped back, his voice revealing panic and confusion. "No you don't," Emma replied calmly. "And now you're about to get your crew killed." She was right. Within seconds, Jake's tank was destroyed by simulated enemy fire, a massive failure that would go into everyone's permanent record. Marcus Thompson, meanwhile, had positioned his tank incorrectly and couldn't provide effective supporting fire. "This is Walsh," Emma announced over the radio. "I'm taking command of the assault. All units follow my lead." What happened next was a masterclass in tank tactics. Emma repositioned her tank to provide covering fire, guided the remaining functional crew through a complex flanking maneuver, and coordinated the assault with precision that impressed even the most skeptical instructors. When the exercise ended with complete mission success, the silence on the radio was deafening. "Outstanding performance by Crew Alpha," came the voice of the senior instructor over the radio. "Walsh, report to the command post for debrief." As Emma climbed out of her tank, she found herself face to face with Jake Morrison, whose face was red with humiliation and rage. "You think you're hot shit now?" he snarled, stepping close enough that she could smell the tobacco on his breath. "I think I'm a tank commander," Emma replied calmly, not backing down an inch. "And as of tonight, so does everyone else." The morning after the night exercise brought a fundamental shift in the dynamics of Emma's training company. Word of her exceptional performance had spread throughout the barracks, and for the first time since arriving at Fort Benning, she walked into the mess hall to find recruits actually making room for her at their table. "Mind if I sit here?" asked Brian Phillips, approaching with his breakfast tray. He'd been her driver during the exercise and had experienced firsthand what it was like to be led by someone who knew what they were doing. "Of course," Emma replied, still somewhat shocked by the change in atmosphere. "That was some serious tactical work last night," Brian continued as he sat down. "I've never seen crew coordination like that from recruits. Where'd you learn to command like that?" Before Emma could answer, David Martinez and Tom Wilson joined them, their expressions showing newfound respect. "My dad was a tank commander in Desert Storm," Tom said. "He told me stories about crew coordination under fire, but I never really understood what he meant until last night. You made us better than we thought we could be." Emma felt a warmth spreading through her chest, the first positive feeling she'd experienced since arriving at Fort Benning. For weeks, she'd been fighting alone against systematic harassment and sabotage. Now, finally, she had allies. But the change wasn't universal. From across the mess hall, Jake Morrison, Marcus Thompson, and Kevin Walsh watched the scene with undisguised hostility. Their humiliation during the night exercise had only intensified their resentment. "Look at Princess holding court," Jake muttered, his voice carrying clearly across the room. "One lucky night and now she thinks she's a real soldier." "Lucky hell," Marcus replied, working his tobacco aggressively. "She probably had the instructors feeding her information through her radio. These exercises are all rigged anyway." But their complaints sounded hollow now, even to their own ears. Too many people had witnessed Emma's performance, had heard her clear commands and precise tactical decisions. The excuses weren't working anymore. The real transformation came during Week 8, when Sergeant Rodriguez announced that recruits would be competing for leadership positions within the company. Based on performance evaluations, technical knowledge tests, and peer reviews, selected recruits would be given acting ranks and responsibilities for the remaining training period. "The following recruits report to the orderly room for leadership interviews," Rodriguez announced, reading from his clipboard. "Morrison, Thompson, Walsh, Phillips, Martinez." Emma's name was last on the list, and when Rodriguez called it, she could see the surprise on several faces. Despite weeks of harassment and the sabotaged exercise that had gone into her permanent file, her overall performance had been strong enough to merit consideration for leadership. The interviews were conducted by a panel of senior NCOs and officers, including Captain Sarah Chin, the company commander. Emma had rarely interacted with Captain Chin, but she knew the officer's reputation for fairness and competence. "Walsh," Captain Chin began, reviewing Emma's file, "your technical scores are among the highest in the company. Your tactical performance during the night exercise was exceptional. But there are concerns about your ability to work with your peers." Emma took a deep breath. This was her chance to either reveal the systematic harassment she'd endured or take the high road and focus on the future. "Ma'am," she said carefully, "I believe that respect is earned through competence and character, not demanded through rank or intimidation. If given the opportunity to lead, I would focus on bringing out the best in every soldier under my command, regardless of our personal history." Captain Chin studied Emma's face for a long moment. "That's a very diplomatic answer, Walsh. But leadership isn't about diplomacy, it's about making hard decisions under pressure. Are you prepared for that responsibility?" "Yes, ma'am. I am." The announcement came 2 days later during morning formation. Sergeant Rodriguez stood before the assembled company with a list of new acting ranks and assignments. The following recruits are promoted to acting leadership positions, he announced. Acting Sergeant Morrison, you'll serve as first squad leader. Acting Sergeant Thompson, second squad leader. Emma held her breath, knowing that her entire future in the military might depend on the next few words. Acting Sergeant Walsh, Rodriguez continued, and Emma felt her world shift. You are appointed as company executive officer, second in command of this training unit. The silence that followed was profound. Emma had not only been given a leadership position, she'd been given the highest leadership position available to recruits. She was now officially the second-ranking trainee in the entire company, responsible for coordinating between squads and assisting the senior trainee commander. Congratulations, Sergeant Walsh, Captain Chin said after the formation disbanded. Don't let us down. But the real test of Emma's new position came immediately. As the newly appointed XO, she was responsible for conducting evening briefings, coordinating training schedules, and most importantly, managing conflicts between recruits. Jake Morrison was the first to test her authority. I'm not taking orders from some princess who got her rank through affirmative action, he announced loudly during the first squad leaders meeting. This is bullshit politics, not real leadership. Emma looked around the room at the other acting squad leaders. Marcus Thompson glowering with resentment, Kevin Walsh shaking his head in disgust, but also Brian Phillips and David Martinez nodding encouragingly. Sergeant Morrison, Emma said, her voice calm but carrying unmistakable authority, you have two choices. You can work with me to make this company the best training unit at Fort Benning, or you can continue fighting battles you've already lost. What's it going to be? Jake's face reddened with anger, but before he could respond, Captain Chen's voice came from the doorway. Is there a problem here, Sergeant Walsh? No problem, ma'am, Emma replied without taking her eyes off Jake. Just discussing coordination procedures for tomorrow's training. Good. Morrison, I want to see you in my office. Now. As Jake left the room, Emma realized that her appointment hadn't just been about her individual performance. Captain Chin had been watching the harassment campaign, documenting the behavior and waiting for the right moment to address it. By promoting Emma to XO, she was sending a clear message about what kind of leadership the Army valued. The conversation with Jake Morrison must have been enlightening because when he returned, his attitude had shifted dramatically. Walsh, he said quietly after the other squad leaders had left. We need to talk. Emma waited, saying nothing. Jake struggled with words that clearly didn't come easily. I've been an ass. A complete ass. And I'm sorry. Why? Emma asked simply. Because you're good at this. Really good. And that scared the hell out of me. Jake's confession came out in a rush. I thought I was going to be the top recruit, the natural leader. Then you showed up and made me look like an amateur. Emma studied his face, seeing genuine remorse and something that might have been respect. Jake, she said finally, I never wanted to make anyone look bad. I just wanted to be the best soldier I could be. I know that now. And I want to learn from you if you'll let me. It was the beginning of a transformation that would reshape the entire company dynamic. Over the following weeks, Emma's leadership style, calm, competent, focused on bringing out the best in others, began to influence even her harshest critics. The war for acceptance was finally over. The campaign for excellence was just beginning. Week 12 brought the culminating exercise, a complex, multi-day field training exercise that would test everything the recruits had learned. Companies would compete against each other in realistic combat scenarios, with performance evaluations determining final rankings and future assignments. Emma's company had been transformed under her leadership. Squad coordination was flawless, technical competence was at an all-time high, and most importantly, the unit functioned as a cohesive team rather than a collection of competing individuals. Listen up, Emma addressed her squad leaders during the final planning session. This exercise isn't just about individual performance, it's about proving that we can function as a unit under pressure. Every decision we make affects everyone else. What's the plan, Sergeant Walsh? Asked Brian Phillips, who had become one of her most reliable subordinates. Emma spread out the tactical map, pointing to key terrain features and enemy positions. We're going to use our mobility and coordination advantages. Instead of trying to overpower the opposing force, we'll outmaneuver them. Even Jake Morrison, now genuinely committed to the team concept, leaned forward with interest. How? By doing what they won't expect, Emma replied with a slight smile. They'll assume we'll follow standard tactics. Instead, we're going to innovate. The 3-day exercise began at dawn on a Monday, with Emma's company tasked with defending a strategic ridge line against a simulated enemy attack. The opposing force was comprised of more experienced soldiers from an active duty unit, making the challenge significantly more difficult than anything they'd faced before. Remember, Emma briefed her squad leaders one final time, they have experience but we have preparation and coordination. Stay flexible, communicate constantly, and trust your training. The first day tested their defensive capabilities. Emma positioned her squads with overlapping fields of fire, established communication protocols that allowed rapid response to changing threats, and most importantly, created a command structure that functioned smoothly under pressure. When the attack came, it was fierce and sustained. The experienced opposing force used sophisticated tactics, attempting to exploit weaknesses in the recruit company's defensive positions. But Emma's preparations held firm. Second squad, enemy movement on your left flank. Emma coordinated over the radio, her voice calm despite the intensity of the simulated combat. First squad, provide supporting fire. Roger, supporting fire initiated. Jake Morrison responded, his professionalism now matching Emma's own. For 8 hours, Emma's company repelled wave after wave of attacks, adapting their tactics in real time and maintaining cohesion despite mounting pressure. When the day ended with their defensive line intact, even the opposing force commander expressed grudging admiration. Outstanding defensive coordination, Major Rodriguez announced during the evening briefing. Your communication and adaptability were exceptional. But Emma knew the real test was still ahead. Day 2 would require them to transition from defense to offense, attacking prepared positions held by experienced soldiers who knew they were coming. Here's what we're going to do, Emma explained to her squad leaders during their midnight planning session. Instead of a frontal assault, we're going to use a coordinated flanking maneuver that takes advantage of our mobility and small unit coordination. That's risky, Marcus Thompson pointed out, his earlier hostility now replaced by genuine tactical concern. If we get caught in the open. We won't, Emma replied confidently. Because we're going to move faster and coordinate better than they expect recruits to be capable of. The dawn attack was a masterpiece of small unit tactics. Emma's squads moved in perfect coordination, using terrain features and timing to achieve surprise despite attacking a prepared enemy position. Her radio commands were crisp and precise, adapting the plan in real time as conditions changed. Beautiful work, Captain Chin observed from the evaluation tower, watching Emma coordinate a complex pincer movement that caught the defending force completely off guard. By noon, Emma's company had achieved all their objectives with minimal casualties, demonstrating tactical sophistication that impressed even the most skeptical evaluators. But the final test came on day 3, a free-play exercise where both sides could use any tactics they chose, with victory determined by achieving specific strategic objectives first. This is it, Emma told her exhausted but motivated soldiers. Everything we've worked for comes down to the next 12 hours. Are you ready? The response was unanimous and enthusiastic. Yes, Sergeant. What followed was 12 hours of the most intense tactical competition any of them had ever experienced. Emma's leadership was tested in ways that no classroom exercise could replicate, making split-second decisions with incomplete information, coordinating multiple units across difficult terrain, adapting to enemy actions that threatened to disrupt carefully laid plans. Through it all, Emma remained calm, confident, and completely focused on mission accomplishment. Her squad leaders, including former adversaries like Jake Morrison and Marcus Thompson, responded to her leadership with enthusiasm and competence that surprised even themselves. When the exercise ended with Emma's company achieving decisive victory, the silence from the evaluation team spoke volumes. In 20 years of conducting these exercises, Major Rodriguez announced during the final debrief, I've never seen recruit leadership of this caliber. Sergeant Walsh, your tactical decision-making and unit coordination were simply outstanding. Graduation day at Fort Benning dawned clear and bright, with families gathering to witness the transformation of civilians into soldiers. Emma Walsh stood in front of the formation, wearing the chevrons of a newly promoted sergeant and the coveted tanker boots that marked her as a qualified M1 Abrams crew member. But more than that, she wore the respect of every soldier who had trained alongside her. When I first arrived here, Emma said during the graduation ceremony, addressing not just her own company but the entire training battalion, I faced challenges that had nothing to do with technical competence or physical capability. I faced the challenge of proving that leadership comes in many forms, and that excellence has no gender, no size requirement, no predetermined appearance. She paused, looking out at the faces of recruits who would soon face their own challenges in military service. What I learned is that true leadership isn't about being the biggest or the loudest. It's about bringing out the best in others, about earning respect through competence and character, and about never giving up on yourself or your team. In the audience, Jake Morrison, Marcus Thompson, and the other former antagonists applauded with genuine enthusiasm. The transformation had been complete. Enemies had become allies, harassment had become respect, and conflict had become unity. After the ceremony, Captain Chin approached Emma with a special assignment. "Sergeant Walsh," she said, "based on your performance here, you've been selected for the Army's Advanced Leadership Development Program. Upon completion, you'll return to Fort Benning as an instructor." Emma felt her breath catch. "An instructor, ma'am?" "The youngest in the program's history," Captain Chin confirmed. "Your experience here, both the challenges you faced and how you overcame them, make you uniquely qualified to train the next generation of tank crews." 6 months later, Sergeant Emma Walsh stood before her first class of new recruits, looking out at a diverse group that included both men and women from all backgrounds. Her uniform now bore the instructor badge that marked her as one of the Army's elite trainers. "Welcome to the United States Army Armor School," she began, her voice carrying the authority of hard-earned experience. "Over the next 16 weeks, some of you will discover capabilities you never knew you had. Others will face challenges that test not just your technical skills, but your character and determination." She paused, remembering her own first day and the harassment that had nearly broken her spirit. "But I want you to know this. In my training company, every soldier will be evaluated solely on their performance, their dedication, and their ability to contribute to the team. Excellence is the only standard that matters here." In the back of the classroom, a senior NCO smiled with satisfaction. The Army's newest instructor had been forged in the crucible of adversity and had emerged stronger, more capable, and more committed to developing others. The little girl who had been called Princess and dismissed as unfit for military service had become exactly the kind of leader the Army needed. One who understood that true strength comes not from tearing others down, but from building them up. Emma Walsh had proven that when you refuse to quit, when you focus on excellence rather than revenge, and when you lead by example rather than by intimidation, even the most hostile environment can be transformed. The bullies had become her followers. The harassment had become her motivation. And the girl they had tried to break had become their commander. Sometimes the smallest soldiers cast the largest shadows. And sometimes, the quiet determination to simply do your job well is the most powerful force of all.